I have watched arrogant defendants challenge police officers, insult witnesses, and lie under oath without blinking. But the day a woman named Karen Cole looked directly at a decorated war veteran in my courtroom and mocked the sacrifice that had nearly killed him, I felt something I rarely allow myself to feel on the bench: anger. What Karen did not understand was that the quiet man standing across from her had brought one piece of evidence into my courtroom, one devastating piece of evidence that would eventually make her regret every word. Before we go any further, make sure you have subscribed to this channel for more powerful courtroom stories like this one. And if you have not subscribed yet, subscribe now. Also, comment below and tell us where you are watching this video from. Now let me take you back to where this case truly began. The plaintiff's name was Daniel Carter. He entered my courtroom slowly, dressed in a dark blue suit that looked as though it had been hanging untouched in a closet for years. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and perhaps 50 years old. But pain has a way of adding years to a person's face. His left hand remained close to his side, and every few steps, his right leg dragged slightly behind him. Most people would have noticed the limp. I noticed what he was doing to hide it. He timed each step carefully. He kept his shoulders level. He refused to reach for the wooden rail beside him, even when his balance shifted. That told me more about Daniel in 10 seconds than a written statement could have told me in 10 pages. Pride was holding him upright, not vanity, not ego. The kind of pride a person develops after surviving something that was supposed to destroy him. Behind Daniel sat a woman named Emily Carter, his daughter. She appeared to be in her late 20s. She watched her father with the nervous attention of someone who had spent years pretending not to worry about him. Every time his legs stiffened, her fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag. Across the aisle stood the defendant. Karen Cole. Karen was 38 years old, sharply dressed, and completely at ease. She wore a fitted cream-colored jacket, expensive jewelry, and the faint smile of a person who believed the courtroom was simply another room she could control. Years on the bench teach you that confidence and innocence are not the same thing. Innocent people may be confident, certainly, but there is usually urgency beneath it. They want to be understood. They listen closely. They react when facts are misstated. Karen did none of those things. She looked around my courtroom as though she were studying an audience. Then she noticed Daniel's limp. Her eyes dropped toward his leg for less than a second, and the corner of her mouth lifted. It was a tiny expression. Most people missed it. I did not. The dispute, according to the complaint, involved $18,000. Daniel claimed that Karen had collected money on behalf of a non-profit organization called Heroes Forward, an organization that supposedly provided emergency housing and medical assistance to veterans. Daniel had donated $5,000 of his own savings. He had also helped Karen organize a fundraising dinner where an additional $13,000 was raised. The money disappeared. Karen insisted that Daniel had never donated anything personally and that the fundraiser had barely covered its own expenses. She claimed he was suing her because she had refused to make him the public spokesperson for the organization. When I asked Daniel why he had donated so much money, he did not give me a speech. He simply said, "Because when I came home, somebody helped me." His voice was low and controlled. Karen sighed loudly. I turned toward her. "Is there something you would like to say?" She crossed her arms. "I just think this whole wounded hero routine is a little much." The courtroom became still. Daniel did not move. His daughter did. Emily leaned forward as though the words had struck her physically. I raised one hand before she could speak. There are moments when a judge must decide whether to shut a person down immediately or allow them enough room to reveal exactly who they are. I chose to let Karen continue. "What routine?" I asked. She glanced toward Daniel. The limp, the quiet voice, the suit. He knows how people react when they hear he was in the military. Daniel's jaw tightened. Were you in the military? I asked Karen. No. Will you present when Mr. Carter was injured? No. But then be very careful about what you say next. She should have stopped. A wise person would have. But arrogance often creates the illusion that every warning is meant for someone else. Karen tilted her head and looked directly at Daniel. I am just saying that plenty of people served. It does not mean everyone owes him money forever. A murmur moved through the spectators. I struck my gavel once. Quiet. Then I looked at Daniel. He had not turned toward Karen. His eyes remained fixed on the table in front of him, but I saw his right hand close slowly into a fist. That reaction troubled me, not because I believed he might become violent. Daniel's self-control was obvious. What troubled me was the familiarity of his silence. He had heard words like hers before, perhaps from strangers, perhaps from employers, perhaps from people who saw the scars but understood nothing about the cost. I asked him where he had served. Afghanistan, he said. How long? 3 deployments. And your injury? He paused. Emily lowered her eyes. Daniel answered, roadside explosion. Karen laughed under her breath. It was not loud, but in a silent courtroom, contempt has its own volume. I looked at her for several seconds. She stopped smiling. You find that amusing? No, I just think this is emotional manipulation. That was the moment my view of the case began to change. Until then, I had been examining a financial dispute. Receipts, donations, expenses, promises. But Karen was not merely denying Daniel's claim. She was attempting to destroy his credibility by attacking the very part of his life that made others respect him. It was a deliberate strategy. Humiliate the plaintiff. Make him emotional. Provoke an outburst. Then point to that outburst as proof that he was unstable. I had seen lawyers attempt similar tactics. See, Karen was doing it without a lawyer, and she was doing it well. Mr. Carter, I said, do you have proof of the $5,000 donation? Yes, Judge. He placed a folder on the table. Karen immediately shook her head. That is not what he says it is. You have not seen it yet, I told her. I already know what he brought. That answer caught my attention. I leaned forward. How do you know? For the first time since entering my courtroom, Karen hesitated, only for a second. But hesitation is often where the truth first tries to escape. She recovered quickly, because he has been threatening me with fake documents for months. Daniel finally looked at her. There was no anger in his expression now, only disappointment. He opened the folder and removed a bank statement, several printed emails, and a photograph from the fundraising dinner. Then he reached beneath them and took out a small black flash drive. Karen's confidence changed instantly. Her arms uncrossed, her shoulders stiffened, and her eyes locked onto that flash drive as though nothing else in the room existed. I noticed it. The court officer noticed it. Even the spectators seemed to sense that something had shifted. What is on that drive? I asked. Daniel looked at me, then toward his daughter. A recording, he said. Karen stepped forward. That cannot be played. Her voice was no longer calm. I had not ruled on anything. I had not even touched the evidence. Yet she was already trying to stop the courtroom from hearing it. That told me the recording mattered. I asked Daniel who had made it. Before he could answer, Karen raised her voice. He recorded me illegally. Daniel remained still. Then Emily stood from the first row and said 6 words that changed the atmosphere of the entire courtroom. My father did not record her. I turned toward her. Then who did? Emily looked directly at Karen. The man she thought was dead. And then silence. For several seconds, no one moved. Karen stared at Emily as if she had spoken a name that was never supposed to be heard again. The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly, turning toward me with the same polished expression she had worn when she entered my courtroom. "That is ridiculous," she said. "She is trying to create drama." I had heard that sentence many times before. People often call something drama when the truth has arrived before they are ready to face it. I looked at Emily. "Sit down until I ask you to speak." "Yes, Judge." She obeyed immediately, but her eyes never left Karen. I turned back to Daniel. "Who is the man your daughter is referring to?" Daniel rested both hands on the table. His fingers were steady, yet I could see the tension running through his shoulders. "His name was, or is, Michael Reeves." Karen interrupted. "He has nothing to do with this case." "Do not speak over him," I said. Her mouth closed. But the anger remained visible in her eyes. Daniel explained that Michael Reeves had served in the same unit with him during his final deployment. They had been friends for nearly 17 years. Michael was not just another soldier Daniel knew. He was the man who had pulled Daniel from the wreckage after the explosion that injured him. As Daniel spoke, the courtroom seemed to shrink around his words. He described Michael as funny, reckless, and loyal to a fault. The kind of man who could turn a miserable night in the desert into a story people would laugh about years later. But when Michael returned home, the laughter faded. He struggled to keep a job. His marriage collapsed. Medical bills accumulated. He moved between temporary apartments and friends' spare rooms, always insisting that he would be back on his feet soon. That was how Daniel first became involved with Heroes Forward. Karen had approached him at a veteran support event 6 months earlier. She told him her organization helped former service members like Michael obtain emergency housing, counseling referrals, and financial assistance. She knew exactly what to say. That detail mattered to me. Manipulative people rarely begin with a lie that sounds impossible. They begin with a truth their victim desperately wants to believe. Karen had photographs, brochures, a professional website. She spoke about sacrifice, dignity, and the responsibility civilians had toward returning soldiers. Daniel believed her because she seemed to understand the very things he found difficult to explain. She promised to place Michael in a furnished apartment within 2 weeks. Daniel donated $5,000. Then he agreed to appear at her fundraising dinner. The photograph on the table showed the event clearly. Daniel stood near a podium wearing his service medals. Karen stood beside him with one hand resting on his shoulder, smiling toward the camera. Behind them was a banner that read, "No hero left behind." I held the photograph for a moment. There is something particularly cold about using noble words to disguise selfish intentions. A thief who steals money is one thing. A thief who steals trust from wounded people is another. "What happened to Mr. Reeves?" I asked. Daniel's face changed. "He disappeared." Karen rolled her eyes. "He left town." "That is not disappearing." Daniel turned toward her, and for the first time I saw anger break through his restraint. "You told me he was dead." Her expression hardened. "Because that is what I was told." "By whom?" She did not answer him. I spoke before the exchange could escalate. "Mr. Carter, address me, not the defendant." He nodded. Daniel explained that 2 weeks after the fundraiser, Michael stopped answering calls. His apartment had been emptied. His social media accounts disappeared. When Daniel asked Karen whether Heroes Forward had relocated him, she claimed Michael had suffered a fatal overdose in a motel outside the city. There was no funeral, no obituary, no police report Daniel could find. Karen told him Michael's family wanted privacy. Daniel wanted to believe her. Grief can make intelligent people accept explanations they would normally question. Not because they are foolish, but because the alternative is emotionally unbearable. For almost a month, Daniel blamed himself. He believed he had failed the man who once saved his life. Then a letter arrived. It had no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing only one sentence. Daniel, do not trust her. I am alive. The handwriting belonged to Michael. The spectators began whispering again. I raised my hand and the room settled. Did you verify the handwriting? I asked. Daniel nodded. I had letters from our deployments. It was his. Karen laughed, but there was strain beneath it now. This is absurd. Anyone could copy handwriting. Daniel looked at me. That is what I thought. His answer surprised me. He was not blindly accepting evidence that supported his suspicions. He had doubted the letter. He had examined it. That increased his credibility. Daniel hired a private investigator named Rachel Morgan. Rachel traced Michael's last known movements and discovered that he had checked into a rehabilitation center under a different surname. But before she could speak with him, he vanished from the facility. 3 days later, Karen called Daniel. She knew about the investigator. That was impossible, Daniel said. He had told no one except Emily and Rachel. Karen warned him to stop digging into Michael's disappearance. She claimed he was dishonoring his friend by turning a tragedy into a conspiracy. Then she said something Daniel would never forget. Some men survive wars because they know when to walk away. As he repeated those words in my courtroom, I looked at Karen. She showed no surprise, no confusion, only irritation that he had remembered them. Did you say that? I asked. I might have said something similar. He was harassing me. Why would his search for a missing veteran threaten you? It did not threaten me. Then why tell him to stop? Because he was unstable. There it was again, the same strategy. Attack Daniel's emotional condition. Make every reasonable question sound like paranoia. Turn concern into obsession and persistence into instability. I had seen this pattern in fraud cases, family disputes, and abusive relationships. The manipulator does not merely deny the truth. The manipulator tries to make the other person ashamed for noticing it. Daniel reached for the flash drive. This recording was made 2 days after she warned me. I asked him again who recorded it. He told me Rachel Morgan had received a phone call from Michael Reeves. Michael sounded frightened. He claimed Karen had taken money in his name and threatened to report him for fraud if he exposed her. Rachel recorded the conversation with Michael's permission. Karen immediately objected again, insisting the voice could be fabricated. Her reaction interested me because Daniel had not yet described what Michael said about her. She was defending herself against an accusation that had not been spoken. I asked the court officer to take the flash drive. As he approached Daniel's table, Karen's eyes followed every movement. Her breathing became shallow. One hand disappeared beneath the edge of her jacket. That was when I noticed something disturbing. She was not reaching for a tissue. She was not adjusting her clothing. She was holding a phone. Put the device on the table, I ordered. Karen froze. Now. She slowly placed the phone in front of her. The screen was still illuminated. A message had just been sent to an unsaved number. I instructed the officer to bring it to me. Karen protested, but her confidence had cracked. She began speaking too quickly, accusing Daniel, Emily, and Michael of coordinating a public attack against her. I looked down at the message on her screen. It contained only 5 words. He brought the recording. Leave now. I raised my eyes toward the courtroom doors. A man in the back row stood abruptly. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Until that moment, he had appeared to be an ordinary spectator. But when the officer moved toward him, he turned and ran. And as the doors swung open behind him, Daniel whispered a name I was not prepared to hear. Michael. The courtroom doors slammed against the wall as Michael Reeves disappeared into the hallway. For one brief moment, everyone seemed frozen. Daniel gripped the edge of his table. Emily covered her mouth. Karen stood perfectly still, but her eyes had changed. The irritation was gone. What I saw now was fear. "Officer," I said, "bring that man back." The court officer moved quickly, followed by a second deputy from the corridor. The doors closed behind them, leaving us with the sound of hurried footsteps fading into the distance. Karen reached for her phone. "Do not touch it," I warned. "I need to call my attorney. You may request legal counsel, but you are not going to erase anything from that device." She pulled her hand back. Believe me, I did not yet know whether the man who fled was truly Michael Reeves. Daniel had seen him for only a few seconds beneath a low baseball cap. People under emotional pressure sometimes recognize what they hope or fear to see, but Karen's message was real. He brought the recording. "Leave now." She had sent it seconds before the man ran. That was no coincidence. I looked at Daniel. "When was the last time you saw Michael in person?" 4 months ago. "Could you identify him with certainty?" Daniel hesitated. That hesitation helped him. A dishonest witness often answers too quickly because certainty sounds convincing. A truthful witness understands the danger of claiming more than he knows. "I saw his face for a second," Daniel said. "It looked like him. The way he moved looked like him." "How did he move?" "He favors his right shoulder. An old training injury." Karen shook her head. "Half the men his age have bad shoulders." I turned toward her. "You seem very eager to prove that was not Michael, because this is becoming insane." "No, Miss Cole." "What is becoming concerning is that you sent a warning to a man who fled the instant an officer approached him." She lifted her chin. "That message was not about the spectator." "Then who was it about?" "A volunteer." "What is his name?" She paused. "Christopher." "Christopher what?" "I do not remember his last name." "You sent an urgent warning to a man whose last name you do not remember." "He helped at events." "What was he supposed to leave?" Karen glanced toward the doors. "The building." "Why?" "Because Daniel has been threatening everyone associated with Heroes Forward." Daniel spoke before I could stop him. "That is a lie." Karen turned toward him. "You followed me. You sent investigators after me. You frightened my staff. I tried to find my friend. You refused to accept that he wanted nothing to do with you." Daniel's face tightened as though she had found the precise wound she intended to press. That was Karen's real talent. She did not merely lie. She studied people until she understood which truth would hurt them most, then wrapped her lie around it. Michael may indeed have wanted distance from Daniel. He may have felt ashamed, frightened, or trapped. Karen used that possibility to make Daniel question the friendship itself. I had seen defendants create confusion before. Confusion is useful when facts are dangerous. If you cannot disprove the evidence, make everyone argue about motives, memories, and emotions until the original question disappears, but I was not going to allow that. "The issue before me is $18,000, I said. "Mr. Carter claims you collected it for veteran assistance. You claim the money was spent legitimately. Produce the financial records." Karen opened a leather folder and handed several pages to the officer. The records appeared organized at first glance. There were charges for catering, venue rental, transportation, printed materials, and emergency housing assistance. One payment caught my attention. $8,000 had supposedly been transferred to a company called Liberty Transitional Housing. "Who owns this company?" I asked. "It is a private housing provider." That was not my question. "I do not know the owner personally. You transferred $8,000 to them. They sent an invoice." "Where is the invoice?" "It should be there." It was not. I studied the bank record more carefully. The transfer had been made 3 days after the fundraising dinner. Beside the payment was an account reference ending in 4 numbers. Daniel suddenly leaned toward Emily and whispered something. "What did you say?" I asked. Emily looked at me. "Those numbers are familiar. From where?" She opened her handbag and removed a stack of documents bound with a clip. Karen's eyes narrowed. Emily explained that after Michael vanished, she had helped her father review every message and receipt connected to Heroes Forward. One of Karen's reimbursement forms listed a personal checking account with the same final 4 digits. I compared the documents. They matched. Karen immediately objected. Many accounts can end in the same numbers. That is true, I said. So this may be coincidence. She appeared relieved. Then I continued, which is why we are going to examine the rest of the information. Her relief disappeared. The officer returned several minutes later. He had not caught the fleeing man. A security guard had seen him exit through a side stairwell and enter a gray sedan waiting behind the building. The license plate had been covered. That detail changed the situation. People do not normally cover a license plate for a casual visit to court. The officer placed Karen's phone inside an evidence pouch. She demanded it back, insisting I had no right to keep private property. I explained that the message might relate to false testimony, financial fraud, or an attempt to interfere with evidence. For the first time, she asked for an attorney. I told her she had that right. But I also reminded her that the civil proceeding had begun, and anything already entered into the record would remain there. Daniel looked toward the computer monitor where the flash drive had been connected. Judge, you need to hear Michael's call. Karen spun toward him. You do not know that it is Michael. I know his voice. He used you, she said. He always used you. Daniel's expression hardened. What did he use me for? Karen realized too late that she had said too much. The entire courtroom seemed to recognize it at once. She had spent the morning suggesting she barely knew Michael. Now she was describing the nature of his relationship with Daniel as if she understood it intimately. I leaned forward. How well did you know Mr. Reeves? I knew what Daniel told me. That is not what you just implied. I meant that Michael accepted his money. Which money? Silence. Daniel stared at her. Karen's eyes moved toward the sealed phone, then toward the courtroom doors. Calculating her next answer, in my experience, a liar's greatest enemy is not evidence. It is time. Give the liar enough time to speak, and eventually one lie collides with another. Karen had reached that collision. She claimed Michael manipulated Daniel into paying his debts. She said he had invented emergencies, exaggerated his medical condition, and pressured Daniel to continue helping him. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked one quiet question. How do you know about the hospital bill? Karen's face went blank. Emily stood halfway from her seat. What hospital bill? I asked. Daniel explained that 2 years earlier, Michael had required emergency surgery. Daniel paid part of the bill anonymously. Only 3 people knew. Daniel, Emily, and Michael. Karen was not one of them, unless Michael had told her, or unless she had seen his private financial records. Karen began gathering her papers. This hearing is over. No, I said. Sit down. You cannot force me to continue without counsel. You requested counsel after making multiple statements under oath. You may stop answering questions that could expose you to criminal liability. You may not leave with documents already introduced as evidence. She clutched the folder against her chest. The court officer stepped closer. For several seconds, Karen and I stared at one another. She had entered my courtroom believing composure was power, but true composure comes from having nothing to hide. Hers depended on controlling every person, every document, and every unexpected question. Now that control was disappearing. Slowly, she placed the folder back on the table. I instructed the clerk to play the recording. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the audio system connected. A burst of static came through the speakers, followed by Rachel Morgan's voice, asking whether the caller consented to being recorded. A man answered. Daniel closed his eyes. It was Michael. His voice sounded weak and distant. But Daniel recognized it immediately. So did Karen. I knew because her shoulders dropped the moment he spoke. Michael said Karen had promised him housing and treatment. Instead, she persuaded him to sign forms he did not understand. She deposited donations into accounts opened using his personal information. Then Michael's voice trembled. He said he had tried to confront her. Rachel asked what happened next. There was a long pause on the recording, Michael whispered. She showed me a photograph of Daniel's daughter. Emily stopped breathing. Daniel turned toward her. Rachel asked why Karen had shown him Emily's photograph. Michael answered, she said accidents happen to families who ask the wrong questions. A cry escaped from the spectators. Daniel lunged toward Karen's table. The officer caught him before he reached her. Karen stepped backward, shouting that the recording was fake. Emily was crying. Daniel struggled against the officer, not to attack Karen, but to reach his daughter. I struck the gavel repeatedly. Mr. Carter, control yourself. He stopped. His chest rose and fell as he looked at Emily, realizing that while he believed he had been protecting Michael, someone may have been watching his own child. Then another voice appeared on the recording, a woman's voice, calm, clear, unmistakable. Karen's voice. You should have stayed dead, Michael. And before the recording ended, we heard a heavy door open, footsteps approaching, and Michael say something that made even me rise from my chair. She found me. The recording ended with a burst of static. For several seconds, nobody in my courtroom spoke. Daniel stood beside his table, one hand gripping the back of his chair. Emily remained frozen in the front row. Even the court officer, a man who had heard confessions, threats, and desperate lies for more than 20 years, looked disturbed. Karen was the only person who moved. She reached for the flash drive. The officer blocked her hand. That recording is fabricated, she said. Anyone can create a fake voice now. Her tone was forceful, but her body betrayed her. Her breathing had quickened, and she kept looking toward the courtroom doors as though she expected someone to return or feared that someone would. I ordered the clerk to preserve the recording and contact court security. Then I requested that Rachel Morgan, the private investigator who had made the recording, be brought into the courtroom. Karen shook her head. This is supposed to be a civil hearing. It was, I said. That silenced her. Judges are trained not to make accusations before the evidence is complete. Suspicion is not proof. A frightening recording is not automatically authentic. But by that point, I was no longer examining a simple dispute over missing donations. I was looking at a possible network of fraud, intimidation, identity theft, and witness interference. And somewhere beyond my courtroom, Michael Reeves was running from someone. Rachel arrived 30 minutes later. She was a woman in her early 40s with short brown hair, a gray business suit, and the alert expression of someone who never entered a room without locating every exit. She took the witness position and identified herself as a licensed private investigator. She confirmed that Daniel had hired her to locate Michael. Karen stared at her with open hostility. Rachel did not look back. That told me something. Fear often causes people to avoid eye contact. Rachel's refusal was different. It was discipline. She knew Karen wanted a reaction, and she would not provide one. I asked Rachel to explain the phone call. She testified that Michael contacted her from a blocked number at 2:13 in the morning. He claimed he had escaped from a private residential facility and was using a borrowed phone. Escaped? I asked. That was his word. Was he being held against his will? He believed he was. Karen laughed sharply. He was in treatment. Patients say things when they are confused. Rachel turned toward me. I never told Miss Cole he was in treatment. The room fell silent again. Karen's eyes narrowed. I knew because Daniel said it earlier. No, I said. Mr. Carter said Michael had checked into a rehabilitation center. He did not say Michael was receiving treatment when the call was made. Karen tried to answer, but I raised my hand. Think carefully. She stopped, Rachel continued. Michael told her that after Daniel's fundraiser, Karen drove him to a facility called Brookhaven Recovery Residence. He believed it was a temporary housing program for veterans. It was not. Brookhaven was an unlicensed private residence operating under several business names. Michael said his wallet, phone, and identification were taken when he arrived. He was given medication, though he did not know what it was, and told that Daniel no longer wanted contact with him. Daniel's face tightened. That is a lie, he said. I know, Rachel replied. I instructed them both to address me. Rachel said Michael remained at Brookhaven for 7 weeks. During that time, staff members brought him forms to sign. Some appeared to be medical documents. Others were blank. He signed them because he was told they were necessary to receive housing support. Later, he discovered bank accounts and credit applications had been opened in his name. That explained how donation money could be routed through companies that appeared legitimate. Michael Reeves was not only the supposed beneficiary, he was the financial cover. I asked Rachel why he left the first rehabilitation center after she located him. She opened a folder and removed 3 photographs. The first showed Michael entering the center through a side entrance. He looked thinner than the man in Daniel's photograph, with a hood pulled over his head. The second showed a gray sedan parked across the street. The third showed Karen standing beside that sedan. Daniel stared at the image. Emily whispered, she knew where he was. Rachel nodded. The photograph was taken less than an hour before Michael disappeared. Karen stood abruptly. I went there to help him. The officer moved toward her, but I instructed him to wait. You previously said you believed Mr. Reeves was dead. I told her. I said I had been told he died. Yet you visited the facility where he was alive. I learned the report was wrong. I learned the report was wrong. When? Who informed you? A volunteer. Christopher? She hesitated. Yes. Christopher, what again? No answer. Every investigation has a moment when the separate pieces begin forming a single shape. We had missing money, a fake housing company, accounts opened in Michael's name, a threatening recording, and a mysterious volunteer named Christopher. But one question remained. Why had Michael appeared in my courtroom? If he was afraid of Karen, why sit only a few yards away from her? Rachel answered that question before I asked it. He contacted me again this morning. Daniel turned toward her. You did not tell me. He made me promise not to. I studied Rachel. What did he want? To watch the hearing. Why? He believed Miss Cole would expose the location of something he needed. Karen's expression changed. Not fear this time, recognition. I leaned forward. What was he looking for? Rachel reached into her folder and removed a sealed envelope. Before Michael disappeared, he sent this to my office. It arrived yesterday. The envelope contained a handwritten map of a storage facility near the industrial district. One unit had been circled in red. Beneath it, Michael had written, "Everything is in Unit 214. Rachel told me she visited the facility that morning. The unit was registered to Liberty Transitional Housing, the same company that received $8,000 from the fundraiser. She had not opened it. She intended to request a warrant, but before she could contact the authorities, Michael sent her another message. Do not open it until Daniel is in court. That instruction bothered me. People who hide evidence usually fear it will be destroyed. Michael appeared to fear it would be found too soon. Did he explain why? I asked. Rachel shook her head. He said there was someone inside the courthouse working with Karen. The spectators began whispering. I looked toward the clerk, the officers, the attorneys waiting near the back wall. And the few court employees standing beside the doors. A courthouse depends on trust. Every document, every piece of evidence, every private conversation passes through hands the public assumes are safe. Michael believed one of those hands belonged to Karen. I ordered the courtroom locked. No one would leave until security reviewed the surveillance footage and identified the man who had fled. Karen smiled. It was faint, but I saw it. You find this amusing? I asked. No. Then why are you smiling? Because Michael is manipulating all of you. Her confidence had returned too suddenly. That concerned me more than her fear. People regain confidence when they remember an advantage. I asked the officer to check the folder containing Karen's financial records. Several documents were missing page numbers. One expense report referenced an attachment that had not been included. Rachel leaned closer to the evidence screen. Zoom in on the signature. The clerk enlarged the document. At the bottom of the page was Michael's name, but the signature did not match the letter Daniel received. Daniel saw it immediately. That is not his handwriting. Rachel agreed. Then Emily pointed toward the date. The form had supposedly been signed 3 weeks after Karen claimed Michael had died. Karen's smile disappeared. I instructed security to contact the storage facility and prevent anyone from accessing Unit 214. The officer made the call. He listened for several seconds, then slowly lowered the phone. What is it? I asked. He looked toward Karen. Someone opened the unit 12 minutes ago. Rachel stood. Who? The officer swallowed. The access code belonged to this courthouse. I remember the cold silence that followed. Then the lights in my courtroom went out. A woman screamed. I heard footsteps move quickly near the evidence table. When the emergency lights came on, the flash drive was gone, and Karen Cole was no longer standing at her table. Emergency lights cast the courtroom in a dull red glow. For 1 second, I could see only shadows. Then the shouting began. The court officer ordered everyone to remain still. Spectators pushed away from the benches. Daniel called Emily's name. Rachel moved toward the evidence table, but I told her not to touch anything. Karen's chair was empty, the flash drive was gone, and the side door beside the witness area was slowly closing. Seal the building, I ordered. No one leaves. 2 deputies rushed through the side door. Another positioned himself in front of the public exit. The lights returned less than a minute later. But the courtroom no longer felt like a place of law. It felt like a trap. Daniel reached Emily and held her by both shoulders. Are you hurt? I am fine. His were trembling. I had watched that man remain composed while Karen mocked his injuries, attacked his honor, and used the disappearance of his closest friend against him. But the moment the lights went out, he stopped being a plaintiff. He became a father who believed his daughter might be in danger. That distinction matters. People reveal their deepest loyalties when they are frightened. Daniel did not chase Karen. He did not protect the evidence. He went directly to Emily. Karen had called him unstable. What I saw was restraint under pressure. Rachel examined the area without crossing the officer's line. The drive was not the only copy. Every face turned toward her. She removed a small memory card from the inside pocket of her jacket. I duplicated the recording before I came here. A murmur swept through the room. I looked at Rachel carefully. You expected someone to take it. I expected someone to try. That answer unsettled me. Before I could question her further, one of the courtroom monitors flickered. The evidence screen came alive by itself. At first, it displayed only static. Then a live camera image appeared. Karen stood inside a concrete storage unit, Unit 214. She was holding the missing flash drive. Behind her were metal shelves stacked with cardboard boxes, military assistance applications, prescription containers, bank statements, and dozens of folders marked with veterans' names. Daniel stepped closer to the screen. My God. Karen looked directly into the camera. She did not appear frightened anymore. She smiled. Judge, she said through the speakers, I suggest you end this hearing. The courtroom erupted. I struck the gavel. Oh? Silence! The image was grainy, but clear enough to see someone standing behind Karen. A man wearing a courthouse maintenance uniform was operating a laptop on a folding table. I recognized him. His name was Thomas Grant. He had worked inside that building for 11 years. He repaired courtroom monitors, replaced security cameras, and had access to electrical rooms throughout the courthouse. Michael had been right. Karen had someone inside. Thomas looked toward the camera and whispered, They know. Karen did not turn around. They know what we allow them to know. That sentence told me more about her than anything she had said under oath. Control was not simply something Karen desired. It was how she understood the world. She believed truth existed only when she permitted others to see it. I leaned toward the courtroom microphone. Ms. Cole, you are being recorded. She laughed.
So are you.
The monitor switched views. Now, the screen displayed footage from inside my courtroom during the blackout. The video had been recorded from a hidden camera above the evidence table. It showed Thomas entering through the side door seconds before the lights failed. He removed the flash drive, handed it to Karen, and led her into the corridor. But the footage revealed something Karen had not intended us to notice. A second figure entered the courtroom during the darkness, Michael Reeves. He wore the same baseball cap and jacket as the man who had fled earlier. He moved past the spectators, reached beneath Karen's table, and removed a thin red folder. Then he disappeared through the opposite door. Daniel whispered, He came back. Rachel's face tightened. That is what he wanted. Michael had never come to court merely to watch Karen. He had come to retrieve something. I asked Rachel what might have been inside the folder. She shook her head. I do not know. Karen answered from the screen. I do. She lifted a document toward the camera, Michael's confession. Daniel stared at the monitor. Karen claimed Michael had designed the entire scheme. She said he created fake veterans accounts, forged applications, and used Daniel's reputation to attract donors. According to her, Michael vanished because he knew investigators were closing in. Then she delivered the lie she had clearly prepared for months. Daniel Carter was not a victim. He was Michael's partner. Emily shouted, That is not true. Karen smiled wider. Ask your father where the first donation really came from. Daniel looked confused. I watched him closely. Confusion can be performed, but genuine confusion has a delay. The mind searches before the face reacts. Daniel was not acting. Karen opened the red folder and displayed a transfer record showing $5,000 moving from Daniel's account into an account controlled by Michael. The date was 1 week before the fundraiser. On the surface, it looked damaging, but I noticed one detail. The routing number was wrong. Earlier, Emily had provided Daniel's real bank statement. I had studied it carefully. The number on Karen's document belonged to a different institution. You forged it, I said. Her smile faded slightly. Prove it. I already can. The courtroom reacted instantly. Karen looked toward Thomas. He began typing rapidly on the laptop. Rachel suddenly pointed at the screen. Look behind them. On the back wall of the storage unit was a handwritten chart connecting names, account numbers, and donation totals. At the top, written in large black letters, were the words Project P.O. Enix. Beneath it were photographs of at least 30 veterans. Some had red marks across their faces. Others had the word active written below them. Michael's photograph was marked Lexibly. Daniel's photograph was marked Access. Emily's photograph was marked Leverage. When Daniel saw that word beneath his daughter's face, something inside him broke. He struck the table with both hands. You threaten my child. His voice filled the courtroom. It was not the voice of an unstable man. It was the voice of a father discovering that his loyalty had been turned into a weapon. Emily grabbed his arm, but tears were already running down her face. Karen remained calm. You should have stopped looking. Even I struggled to stay composed. I had spent years listening to defendants justify cruelty as necessity, but Karen did not justify it. She enjoyed demonstrating that she had predicted Daniel's pain. That was her mistake. People like Karen often believe emotional control makes them intelligent. In reality, it can make them careless. They become so fascinated by another person's suffering that they reveal information they should have hidden. What was Project Phoenix? I asked. Thomas stopped typing. Karen said nothing. Rachel answered. It was not a charity. She had taken photographs of the chart when she visited the storage facility earlier. She had not entered the unit, but she had used a camera through a damaged section of the rear wall. Project Phoenix targeted veterans with unstable housing, medical debt, or limited family contact. Heroes Forward collected their personal information under the promise of assistance. Then shell companies opened accounts, applied for credit, and redirected charitable donations through their identities. The victims were chosen because Karen believed no one would trust them if they complained. She used their trauma as camouflage. If they became confused, she called them unreliable. If they became angry, she called them dangerous. If they disappeared, she called them dead. That was the hidden architecture of her operation. And Michael had discovered it. The storage unit camera suddenly shook. A loud impact came from outside the frame. Thomas looked toward the door. Someone is here. Karen stepped backward. The metal door behind her began to rise. Police lights flashed across the concrete floor. Karen grabbed a small black device from the table. Rachel recognized it immediately. That is a remote drive. Karen held it above the laptop. One click, she said, and every record disappears. Then a voice came from behind the rising door. No, Karen. Michael Reeves stepped into the unit with 2 federal investigators behind him. He removed his cap. Daniel gripped the edge of the table as if his legs could no longer support him. Michael looked directly into the camera. He was thinner, exhausted, and visibly afraid, but he was alive. Karen turned toward him. You signed the confession. Michael held up the red folder he had taken from her table. No, he said. You signed yours. He opened the folder and removed a set of handwritten pages. They were not his confession. They were Karen's private instructions to Thomas, payments, access codes, fake company names, and a list of witnesses who needed to be silenced. Every page carried her handwriting. Every payment matched the accounts in Unit 214. Karkin's composure vanished. She screamed at Michael, called him a liar, and lunged toward the laptop. The investigators restrained her before she reached it. But what happened next became the moment no one in that courtroom would ever forget. Michael turned toward the camera and addressed Daniels. You did not fail me. Daniel covered his face. Michael's voice broke. You saved me before I was ready to be saved. Daniel began to cry. Not quietly, not with embarrassment. He wept like a man releasing 4 months of guilt all at once. Emily wrapped her arms around him. Spectators stood from their seats. Even the officers looked away to give him a fragment of privacy. Then Michael said one final thing. The money is still there, all $18,000. I asked where. He looked at Karen. In the account she opened under the judge's name, and suddenly every camera in that courtroom turned toward me. Every camera in the courtroom turned toward me. For the first time that day, I was no longer simply the judge examining the evidence. My own name had become part of it. I remember looking at the monitor and feeling the entire courtroom waiting for my reaction. Daniel lowered his hands from his face. Emily stared at me. Even Karen stopped struggling against the investigators. She wanted to see whether the accusation would shake me. That was how she operated. Karen found the one detail capable of creating doubt, then released it at the exact moment when the truth appeared strongest. "Explain what you mean." I told Michael. His image remained on the screen from inside Unit 214. He said the $18,000 had been transferred into an account created using my name, my courthouse address, and a forged judicial identification number. Karen intended to make it appear that I had accepted money connected to the case. The plan was simple. If Michael exposed her, she would release the account records anonymously. If Daniel brought the matter to court, she would claim the judge assigned to the hearing had been bribed. The evidence would become contaminated, the proceedings would be questioned, and every accusation against her would disappear beneath a scandal. It was clever, cold, but clever. She had not merely prepared to deny the truth. She had prepared to poison the person responsible for deciding it. Karen looked toward me with a faint trace of satisfaction. "Now you understand," she said. "You cannot rule on this case." She was right about one thing. Once evidence suggested that my identity had been used in the scheme, I could no longer treat the matter as an ordinary civil dispute. The integrity of the court itself had been attacked. But Karen misunderstood what that meant. She believed removing me would remove the evidence. It would not. I informed the courtroom that I was referring the suspected criminal conduct to federal and state investigators. The civil claim would be preserved, and another judge would independently review the financial damages. Karen smiled again. She thought she had won a delay. Then I continued, "Your detention, however, does not depend on my civil ruling." Her smile disappeared. The investigators had witnessed her inside the storage unit, holding stolen court evidence, attempting to destroy financial records, and coordinating with a courthouse employee who had interfered with an active proceeding. Thomas Grant was placed in custody beside her. The man who had helped Karen enter secure areas now stood with his head lowered, unable to look at the cameras. People often imagine accomplices as loyal partners. In reality, criminal loyalty lasts only as long as both people believe silence is safer than confession. Thomas began speaking before the investigators even removed him from the unit. He admitted disabling the courtroom lights. He admitted stealing the flash drive. He admitted giving Karen access to internal schedules so she could ensure Daniel's case appeared before a judge whose identity she had already used. Then he revealed one final detail. Karen had ordered him to delete the security footage after the hearing and plant the stolen flash drive inside Daniel's vehicle. The plan was to accuse Daniel of fabricating the recording himself. I looked at Daniel. He stood beside Emily, exhausted and pale. That man had entered my courtroom seeking the return of $18,000. By the end of the hearing, he had learned that someone had stolen his trust, threatened his daughter, used his friend's identity, and prepared to frame him for manufacturing evidence, yet he did not celebrate when Karen was restrained. He looked at Michael. That was all. Money was never the true center of the case. Michael was the investigators escorted Karen from the storage unit. As they moved her toward the police vehicle, she twisted toward the camera and shouted that Daniel was weak, Michael was a fraud, and everyone would eventually regret believing them. Her words echoed through the courtroom speakers. Daniel listened without responding. Then Karen made the mistake that ended any remaining sympathy she might have received. She looked directly into the camera and said, "Men like them come home expecting the world to worship them." The courtroom erupted. Spectators shouted. Emily stepped forward. Even Thomas turned his face away from Karen. I struck the gavel once. The room became silent. "Miss Cole," I said, knowing she could still hear me, "Mr. Carter did not enter this courtroom asking for worship." She stopped struggling. "He asked for accountability." I looked toward Daniel. He did not demand special treatment because of his service. In fact, he tried to hide the pain it caused him. Then I looked toward the monitor, toward the woman who had humiliated him because she believed dignity was weakness. "You mocked his injuries because you thought shame would silence him. You used Mr. Reeves's suffering because you believed no one would trust a frightened veteran. And you threatened a young woman because you knew her father loved her more than he feared you." Karen stared into the camera, but the quality you misunderstood was not their weakness. I paused. It was their loyalty. The investigators led her away. The monitor went dark. In the weeks that followed, the full scale of Project Phoenix became public. Authorities recovered records connected to 34 veterans across 3 states. Multiple shell companies had been used to obtain loans, redirect donations, and create fraudulent medical claims. The $18,000 raised by Daniel was recovered. So were hundreds of thousands more. Thomas Grant pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate with investigators. His testimony connected Karen to the fake companies, the threats, and the forged account created in my name. Karen Cole was eventually convicted on multiple fraud, identity theft, intimidation, and obstruction charges. At sentencing, she remained calm. People often expect villains to break down when justice arrives. Some do not. Some continue pretending that composure means victory. But I noticed something when the victims began speaking. Karen never looked at them, not once. She stared at the table while veteran after veteran described losing savings, housing opportunities, and the courage to ask anyone for help again. Daniel spoke last. He did not mention her insults. He did not describe his medals. He did not ask for the harshest punishment. He simply said, "You chose people who were already carrying heavy things because you thought they would be too tired to fight back." Then he turned toward Michael. "You were wrong." Michael survived. Recovery was not immediate, and it was not simple. Real healing rarely follows the clean ending people expect from courtroom stories. He struggled. He disappeared for several days once. He returned ashamed, convinced he had disappointed Daniel again. Daniel did not lecture him. He drove him home. Months later, the 2 men helped establish a legitimate support program using the recovered funds. It provided independent financial counseling so that no veteran had to surrender personal documents in exchange for assistance. Emily served on its oversight board. She insisted on that. The last time I saw Daniel, he was leaving the courthouse without the dark blue suit. He wore a simple jacket and walked with the same careful limp he had tried so hard to hide on the first day. This time, he used the wooden rail, not because he had become weaker, because he no longer believed accepting support diminished his strength. Before he left, he looked back at my bench and thanked me. I told him the truth. He did not need to thank me. Justice had not begun when I raised my gavel. It began when Michael found the courage to make that call. It continued when Rachel protected the recording, when Emily refused to be intimidated, and when Daniel walked into a courtroom knowing that the woman across from him would attack the most painful parts of his life. I have presided over hundreds of cases involving money, deception, and cruelty. But this case stayed with me because Karen believed humiliation was power. She believed that if she mocked a man's wounds, she could make the world forget how he received them. She was wrong. A person's scars do not make them less credible. Their fear does not make them weak. And silence does not always mean surrender. Sometimes silence is simply the moment before the truth stands up. Karen tried to make a war hero regret speaking. Instead, my courtroom made her answer for every word.